Hey everybody, this is Jason Corder, aka Off the Sky. I'm going to be starting a new series of sketchsplorations. I don't know if you've caught any of my previous tutorials, but I recommend those for some of the techniques I'll be employing in some of these sketchsplorations are in those videos. Big difference here is I'll be talking through a lot of these. One silver lining of the whole COVID pandemic is I spent a lot of time doing Zoom meetings for work with family. It's gotten me kind of in the mindset of using a mic more, and some of the comments I got, I guess, from some of the previous videos and tutorials was, we'd love to hear you talk about some of this stuff. I guess it brings that human element in there. And also I've got some lectures I have to do at Denver University. So this is, a bit of practice for me to get me more familiar with using a microphone and speaking and all that, because that's not my forte. Typically listening has been my forte. So I'm really glad to be done with a lot of albums and have more time to spend with doing some sketching, which is what I like to do sort of in my downtime. And I usually approach it with no real big expectations of trying to produce a great song. I mostly just approach it with the ideas of playing with some new plugins and Max for Live patches, or just various ideas that I might have kind of rolling around in my head as I'm walking around the neighborhood. So I got my video going on here. I like to have a video on a second monitor typically as just kind of visual inspiration, which I think subconsciously helps drive some ideas, adds a little bit of interest to these videos as well. So, all right, let's get going. I'm going to usually start out my sketches kind of with some kind of just basic sine waves or noise. Oftentimes, I'll drag in a sample. I kind of just, like to do things sort of randomly sometimes, not really have like too much of a preset, try not to control it too much. So yeah, let's just lay down some notes and see what happens here. Pretty exciting stuff. All right. Let's go ahead and add in some grain delay. I like to diffuse things a bit. Grain delay is great for that. I think for this video today, I'm just going to be focusing in on the Ableton effects. There's really so much endless types of sound designs you can do with those once you start automating things. Super clicky on the wet and dry there. I really don't know why some of the Ableton effects wet and dries are really smooth and some are clicky. You'd think by Ableton 10 they would have fixed that. But anyways, my workaround is to have an Ableton rack that basically in the chain you've got two channels. One is your wet, where I throw my effects. One is dry, and you basically can just drag and fade these and create like a sort of a ramp there. And I like to map, clicking on this thing here, to this knob. So anyways, I'll go ahead and drag this grain delay in there. I think I may have covered this technique in one of my previous tutorials, but I'm just going to revisit it here for a second. Sweet. And I've got this container inside of this wet channel here, and that's where I'm dragging all my effects. I mapped the on and off of this container here to the wet and dry. And as you can see here, it says 0, 0, but basically I typed in 0.1 for the min, which, kind of seems counterintuitive. Why would you have the min higher than the max? But for whatever reason, that works here, so that when I pull this knob down to 0, you see this effect in here shuts off. So you can just basically have, tons of effects in here, and as I pull on and drag up, I think we're not hearing anything because literally the sound is having to travel through this egregious amount of grain delays. We should eventually hear something. Or not. Maybe because we have a lot of pitch shifting going on. Yeah, you can hear the bass going on there. Yeah. Fun. Yeah, so part of this exploration process is obviously making a lot of mistakes. So you'll have to bear with me while I just kind of futz around in these videos. Honestly, I don't think you're living life unless you're making some mistakes and kind of learning from some of that. So yeah, so obviously a bunch of grain delays in a row makes a nice diffuser. Yeah, I could go ahead and modulate this in octaves. Usually when I'm sketching, things are, for the first few hours, not super interesting unless sometimes you get lucky and you get really interesting results quickly. For me, it all just depends, honestly. If I pull in, say, an effect rack that I've saved from a previous session, and I like to save a lot of them, and once I start building up these pre-built ones, I can get more interesting effects. But today we're just starting from scratch, and I think that's what we'll do in these videos. I think if we really wanted to diffuse this out, we would throw in a nice reverb, which really smears things. Definitely kind of goes along with this video a little bit. Or we would add more attack onto this. Let's see, let me pull that down there. Yeah, if we wanted to just do some real washy ambient kind of tones, this would be an interesting effect. But I think we can try something a little bit more daring, a little bit more bizarre, and you pull away some of these. One effect I really love to use is the auto pan. I think typically, by default, it has the phase to 180, which is definitely an auto pan. I like to turn it into a tremolo by pulling the phase down to 0, and I just saved this as my default preset. Sometimes I like to just duplicate it and change the rate a little bit, play with these waveform types and normalizing it to reverse it. Sometimes you can get some interesting patterns that way. Okay, let's see, where do we want to go from here? Let me try just playing with this pitch here. Sweet. I love modulating, and one of my favorite things to do is unlink that and then pull the handle. Let's go ahead and turn off the quantize and just like move it so you see the little orange number there. That means it's off grid basically. So then as this playhead number changes, you can see this playback line kind of slamming around there. So every time we move this number to some arbitrary number, we're going to get, different combinations of where the playhead is at. So the more things we modulate and unlink and move off the grid, the more interesting kind of results we're going to end up getting. Let's go ahead and unlink. Yeah, I really like the vocoder. Can add some nice spectrally almost kind of sounds, especially when you pull this if you really want to play with some interesting tones. Let's go ahead and modulate. I like the looper a lot, especially when you start playing with the reverse and the speed. You can get some pretty cool sounds going on there. Hold on a second. I think I'm automating the wrong thing. No such thing as mistakes, only happy accidents, is the late Bob Ross loved to say, and I completely agree with that philosophy. Bob Ross is a huge inspiration. So let's continue trying to make some happy sounds out of this. Interesting, but you know, definitely not anything I'd write home to mom about. Usually takes me several hours to get somewhere I feel good about. And oftentimes, you know, I'll spend an hour just kind of messing around like this, and I won't feel like, you know, anything came out of it that I really would use down the road in any capacity, but I'll still save it. I don't throw anything out usually, and can always go back and perfect stuff down the road, and that is often how it is. You know, come back to something after a week, and I'm amazed at, you know, how I can turn something that sounds like dirt into something that is a lot more shiny and interesting and beautiful. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and move all these inside of my rack that I'm working on here. So I guess we don't need our sine wave anymore. I'll just go ahead and work with this looper. I want to turn, maybe have the wet dry. And what I'm noticing here is a kind of repeating pattern coming from these auto pans. So I think I want to modulate the rate on this one. Let's go ahead and just drag it out. Give ourselves a and let's go ahead and modulate this some of the stuff on this vocoder. Could also some of that. Sometimes I just like to go in and use the pen tool and just do some really wild, expressionistic, not really. Drag this, we'll duplicate it, squeeze it in time, unlink. Very textural. What'll happen if we... Let's get a reverb on there. I like always like a little reverb to help give this sound kind of a spatial quality, to help make it feel like it's sort of transporting at that point. When it's too dry, it can almost feel a little too clinical or... Let's go ahead and modulate the decay. Sometimes I like to challenge myself to do really bizarre things like modulate every parameter on an effect. And more often than not, some interesting sounds and results can kind of come out of that, surprisingly. Sometimes it can just sound muddy and garbagey, but in the spirit of sound designing and experimenting, there's no such thing as a bad sound. I can be a bit violent with knobs and parameters, but you can get some really interesting, weird results that way. A lot of people are very timid and only want to do shy movements, but sometimes I just like to really push effects to see what'll come out of that. Almost some percussive type stuff coming out of it at this point. Cool. So let me try basically repeating a little bit of what I was just doing. Let's go ahead and pull this out more. Very carpless sounding. which can be neat. It can also be very cliche in some ways. But sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you want to kind of sound like that prevalent synthy modular kind of sound that everyone's got going on these days. I often like to play with a little distortion, add some grit in there. Let's see if I can find... These starting to sound a bit wild. I gotta say, I do love Ableton's effects sometimes. I mean, you can definitely notice a certain sound coming out of them if you're only just using the Ableton effects, but they are some of the most stable and CPU efficient effects. I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in certain projects, certain live set projects, and never had any problems with crashing. Not since Ableton 9, they've really dialed them in. Kind of like the switch between the two tones on this. Let's see if we could just play with the this tune here. One thing I definitely don't like about Ableton 10 is you can easily just drag and erase stuff. Sometimes, I guess, you know, holding down the shift helps prevent that, but I'm still so used to Ableton 9 because I use it every day at my day job, making sounds and music for video games. You still use Ableton 9. It's still amazingly powerful. But for the most part, Ableton 10 is the tuning's, you know, a little bit interesting, but it's like a growling sound comes out of this thing when we do that. Let's see, I think oftentimes I just like to move things from one spot to the other just to hear what will happen. I think I liked it better over here. Definitely sounding murky and lo-fi at this point, which is not always a bad thing. You know, lo-fi is kind of in vogue these days. Sloppy production techniques, old dirty equipment sounds, lots of muffly sounding, dirty, distorted sounding stuff. I kind of like some of that lo-fi. It's definitely, in my mind, kind of starting to fit with this video. Kind of creepy and underwatery. Let's maybe try some of the other settings here. As you can see, I really love dragging in tons of effects. I don't feel any limits, and that's one thing I love about Ableton and Bitwig and Audio Mulch and Hollyhock, some of these other really great sound design oriented DAWs, is you can just kind of go nuts with effects, and oftentimes, you know, it's easy to get lost in what's causing what sound, you know, and you do have to sort of learn to debug, be able to debug a little bit. Or just, you know, you can always just duplicate and then start over. Basically, we get two, even sometimes I'm curious what two of these going on at once might sound like. Let me map, I'm going to map this looper here. Let's see here. Looks like we can't map the play button, which is a little disappointing, but we can definitely map the play to our clip. So when we push play, it should start, yeah. Anyway, rabbit hole there. Let's see. Sometimes it's fun to just diverge from the path and try new things. Keep it fresh, keep it interesting for yourself. I think one of the techniques, which is easier said than done, to becoming, I guess, an accomplished artist, is learning how to make the process fun and creating ways to figure out how to have instant gratification occur. Obviously, that's can also be a pitfall where you want to release stuff that's like half baked, or it's easy to spend hours with something and you think it's super amazing, and then you go listen to something that's from a 20+ year artist, and then you're like, oh, my stuff stinks. But you got to keep that in perspective too, that it does take a long time to really kind of master these things. And I've been doing this stuff for over 20 years, and honestly still there's so many times I sit down and what I end up creating just sounds like garbage. But I have found and proven to myself that, like, with just enough finagling and playing around with, going back to a crappy sketch, can always make it sound more interesting. As long as I'm not beating myself up too much and I'm trying to keep a free, fun spirit about the whole thing, and not trying to have those expectations in the back of my mind sort of chipping away at the fun of it. I think that's really important to learn how to do, because obviously we get into this stuff because we hear something that really inspires us, that we love, and oftentimes it's made by somebody who's been doing it for 30 plus years, or who is just absolutely a prodigy, and we have to remind ourselves that it takes a while to get there. And so if we can figure out ways to make it fun along the way, keep an exploratory attitude about it, I think that honestly is the most important technique that we could possibly teach ourselves, besides the patience thing. They go hand in hand, but if we can learn those things, I think we can still just eventually end up doing really great things, and not getting too bogged down along the way. Because I know a lot of artists who set their expectations way too high, and then they get really, they're afraid to release anything, for one. And I guess it's also good to have friends, peers who you can sort of bounce things off of, but you gotta, keep an open mind there too, because, not everyone's gonna like it. I remember getting really offended in the first few years, when some people heard some stuff I was doing, and they made comments like, oh, I don't really like these certain sounds, and they sound cliche or whatever. And I remember getting a little ticked, but also had other friends say, oh, I really do like that sound there. And so, it's good to keep things sort of objective, and, you're not always going to be able to please everybody. And as long as you're having fun with it, and ultimately, you feel like you're doing something that is interesting and fun, I think that's all that matters in the end. All right, so I don't find what I've done here, particularly interesting. I mean, it's super usable. Obviously, we could just keep adding effects. One thing I might want to explore here is a utility, and adding some volume cutouts to give it a bit more space between the sounds. And maybe playing with some of these curves here. Obviously, I feel like there's so much more that can be done modulation and automation wise to make this more interesting. There's no end to the amount of automation and modulation you can do, and honestly, I found the more that I do, the more interesting stuff sounds. Obviously, you have to be judicious and kind of cautious, because it can be hard to hunt down, where a crazy sound, if you're getting some crazy feedback going on. Obviously, you're gonna have to go through and turn effects on and off and try and, find out where the source of your problem is. Oftentimes, I don't find the source of the problem when I'm sort of printing down from one of these racks. I'll just have to go through by hand and just cut those sections out, in the timeline or in an audio editor. I really love using the new version of Wavesaur is really nice, or SoundForge is one of my favorites. Well, I know a lot of people swear by Audacity. I've never gotten along with that one, even though it's free. Reaper is also kind of a nice audio editor as well, and DAW, just super crazy powerful DAW for that matter, if you get down under the hood and start programming stuff with it. I think I want to modulate. And so maybe there's just too much dropout happening. I'm going to pull some of these up. One thing what we could do is we could drop a wet dry and just sort of modulate or automate. I like using modulate a lot because once you get these clips over here into time, you know, you move it around, you're basically, you know, you're not losing the modulation. You can also cut up a lot of these and you know, swap them around, switch them around, and then consolidate that, and then you end up with some even more fascinating results in terms of the modulations. And you know, you can see where it kind of basically all of our little patterns got all chopped up. So I'm going to copy some of that, and I'm going to go ahead. I've got this here. This here is knob is modulated, and I'm going to add an automation to that. Also, one crazy thing you can do, move this video out of the way for a second here, is you can hit record and move the head here, or the whole thing here. So that basically our playback is jumping around, and what you'll see going on here is we just recorded a bunch of steps. Now, if I go through here and hit Control J on Windows, and let's see here. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the mix here. Maybe it wasn't doing quite what I was hoping for. Let's try that again. All right, and let's jump back over here and consolidate some of that and see what we get. And oftentimes what you can get is a kind of odd, an odd automation curve there that we can then copy back over. Another technique I like to do is there's a MIDI LFO for Max for Live. And basically you can send out MIDI CC with this. And I use Loop BE, that's a freebie. My only rant with it is that once you get a lot of CCs going with it, it auto mutes. So the paid for version lets you have as many things going on at once. But you can definitely have one MIDI CC out going on at once with the free version of Loop BE. We'll send out from channel 1. And I've got the configuration going on in here. Let's see, with the input of Loop BE set to remote and the out set from track. And you'll see what happens here when I, let's go ahead and open this up. Click on the little dot here. We'll set it to CC1. Cool. Now we'll go ahead and MIDI map. So now you can see it's basically being controlled by this. And what I can do here is I'm going to go ahead and open up the automation. I'm going to set it to some really long stretch here. And I'm going to turn this one on and then start to record. And we should get some recordings. Yeah, you can see where it's recording the LFO there. And I can go ahead and play with the rate. We can watch what just happened there. You get some interesting all right, I'll go ahead and stop that. Mute this, or turn it off there too. And go ahead and turn back on automations. Now I got some crazy stuff going on here. One thing I love about Ableton 10 is you can right click, you can simplify, and it makes, you know, some really nice, much nicer curves for you. Obviously, you know, you have these options to insert shapes, but what you can't do is you can't easily change the rate of those through time. You know, some of this looks a little messy, but let's go ahead and copy some of this over. And scale that down. Okay, we've got that one modulating. I think I'm going to add an automation. So you can have automations and modulations working in tandem. Yeah, so that's just going nuts at this point. Obviously, we could get a bunch of LFOs, you know, and linked up. I found that more LFOs I have going on, sometimes I get crashes when loading a project. I've had some really weird issues. I don't think that the max for live mapping in mass quantity is very effective. I notice it uses a lot of CPU. You know, I try to stick with automations as much as possible. If we wanted to, we could do some crazy stuff here. So I'll go ahead and we can have a modulation and two levels of modulation and an automation going on at once. I'll explain. This is kind of a crazy, weird technique. Okay, it looks like we've already got a modulation going on. So the automation that I just made, I'm going to cut that. I'm going to map this to here. And I'm going to show modulation here. Unlink it, pull this in to some arbitrary length. And then we can automate this. And it works all three, they kind of work in tandem. It's probably hard to hear in this particular case. Yeah, I'm such an abuser of knobs. Sometimes it's just fun to hear what things come out of that. Let me go ahead and check out what's going on here in the line. Yeah, I've got a lot of plus 12 pitch on the grain delay, which sometimes can sound a bit silly in my opinion. Starting to sound really grungy. You can get some fascinating sort of spectrally type sounds out of this reverb. If we add another reverb, Some of this automation might be a little too heavy-handed. Where's that middle point? Let's just bring it all kind of down a little bit. Or actually bring it up. I think I'm hearing a bunch of clicks coming off of this decay time. Which is not necessarily what I want. Obviously, I could use, I like RX7 by Isotope. The declicker by them, they make a really great sounding declicker. X-Click from Waves is also really nice. Those are my go-tos. Okay, starting to sound a little weird. Sometimes I like to just pull the tempo down. Which I think isn't mattering in this case, considering we've got this looper here. It's kind of playing on its own based on the speed. Tons of bass coming through. Kind of interesting in some ways. So to demonstrate again the use of modulation plus double modulation plus automation technique, it's a mouthful. I'll go ahead and it's kind of an extreme example here, but I'll group this. I'm going to map this gain to a macro knob. I'm going to modulate the macro knob. We'll have it slowly fade up and fade down. So you can see here you've got this modulation happening here, this modulation happening here. Let me add a little bit more of a curve. So it's less clicky. And if I want to speed it up, and now I can automate this thing. And all three are working together. And so you can get some pretty wild and wacky business happening with this technique. Takes a bit of setup, obviously, but you know, I found to get any decent sound, you really do have to put in the time. You know, but I also have a lot of go-tos here that I can use as starting points, like some of these that I've built. Let's go ahead and shut that off. Like this thing here, you can see it's a monster on the inside. There's a ton happening, and this one is not automated to be automated at all. It's basically a self-run. Quite generative, and I like to have like a bunch of these and just kind of drag them in. And of course, if I were to start automating and modulating stuff inside here, you know, things would get really, really wild. And sometimes it's fun to just sort of drag these in. I've got whole live sets that have like 20 or 30 MIDI tracks, each with like a different rack. And with all kinds of crazy stuff going on, you know, no samples, just like playing with effects to see, you know, how far we could take it. Like this one has got all kinds of nested craziness, but I'm mostly using the vinyl distortion to create some kind of noise source, and then that tremolo to make like kick type sounds. So depending on how much CPU you've got, you know, you can get quite a bit of Ableton effects going on at one time. And this is a fun way to have basically have a live set. If you use Ableton Push, you can basically just use the controller to drop these in and remove them as you go down a live set. You don't even need to really play with the computer at all on stage, which is pretty convenient. If you have enough RAM, you can have projects that just have hundreds of these in there, because effects just take up RAM. Of course, when you know these are all shut off, they don't use any CPU. So you know I've had projects, live sets with 20, 30 MIDI tracks with, you know, a bunch of these just Uber racks in there. And I have found that VST plugins, VST3s and Max for Lives, you know, the more you have, they tend to sort of, even if they're switched off, they tend to add up in CPU. But not the Ableton effects, surprisingly. Well, a few of them actually do, I've noticed. You know, some of the third-party built ones, like the Cytomic ones, Corpus by Applied Acoustics, that one, you know, you can't use a ton of those without it just sort of eating up a lot of CPU just in the background. But stuff like the reverb, the grain delay, you know, the EQ8, a lot of the basic Ableton ones, you know, when they're shut off, that's it. You can just have thousands and thousands and thousands of those. I've literally just duplicated some of these like 100 times just to see if it would suck CPU, and it didn't. Honestly, I was really surprised. So, and of course I was using 8 gigs of RAM, you know, completely just to make that happen. But anyway, so yeah, so I feel like, well, you know, we have an interesting starting point. I think I'm I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Yeah, we might even want to add like a, yeah, I say I'm going to save this and then I hear one more thing I want to do before I get out of here. Yeah, adding a wet and dry to that. You can nest groups as deep as you want to go. You can get pretty insane with it. Obviously, the faster we go, we can get some really crazy stuff because our automations are all following the tempo. Weird and wild stuff. All right. Let's go ahead and save this. One thing I like to do is just have a one project folder with a ton of these ALS files, and in each one you've got, you know, you can open it up with this arrow. Sometimes Ableton is just really, just did not like that. And then you can drag stuff in. Like this is a previous sketch I was working on. Guess I probably need to route some audio. Yeah, I think this is just an effects thing that I made. I'm going to route audio using the gate. And I open up the side chain there. I'm going to choose this first track there. And now we basically have audio from it coming through here. It's subtle for sure. Let me add some gain to that. I guess I could add gain from here too. It's probably better to do, especially if there's distortions along the way. We want higher gain to hit those. All right, so I think that about sums it up. There's probably so much more to cover, but thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I can get around to doing this more often. I'd love to at least once a week put one of these things out, at least for my own benefit of exploring and learning new stuff. But hopefully it inspires you to try some new techniques and maybe learn some things along the way, and hopefully just learn to keep it fun for yourself so that you can keep going and you know, try to be constantly thinking of ways to make it interesting and fun and not putting too much pressure on yourself to having to, quote unquote, do something great or amazing. You know, again, a lot of the sketches that I do suck. And, you know, if I go back to it, you know, after taking some time off from it, a day, a week, a month sometimes, I have found 9 times out of 10, I can always, you know, make it sound a lot more interesting. So anyway, take care, and until next time.